The story begins with a 29-year-old Satoru who seems to be living a difficult life because of the choices he made. One day, on his way for a pizza delivery, he is greeted by a coworker, Irene, who warns him not to eat any of the deliveries. Satoru is unimpressed by her unflattering joke, or whatever it was. He also accounts that the girl always makes that statement to him, although she doesn't show any romantic feelings for him and refers to her as weird. While he drives, he gets a stinging sensation, and then suddenly, it feels like time was rewinded 15 seconds back. When Satoru notices the change, he looks out for the last event before time skips backward and recalls it was related to a truck on another lane. He takes a quick turn, chasing after the truck which had a sleeping driver. To save a little boy crossing the road, Satoru turns the wheel of the truck towards his angle. Unfortunately, he is hit by a moving car on the other side of the road. In faded flashes, Satoru sees his whole life play out like a movie. Knowing he had lost his life, he is reminded and regrets getting involved with strangers. When he opens his eyes, he sees Irene by his bedside, who reveals to him he had been out for 2 days and that the truck driver had a heart attack and died in the van. However, he managed to save the little boy and is called to return to work as soon as possible. When Satoru is discharged from the hospital, he mentions the phenomenon he experienced as revival, a case where he is taken between 1 to 5 minutes before the incident happens. All he had to do was look for the piece that was out of place, and despite not wanting to get involved, finds himself helping and is left with either a positive remark or a negative one, like him being in the hospital. When he arrives home, he finds his mother in the kitchen. She left the hospital earlier to prepare dinner for him. Despite Satoru's efforts to make her leave, she insists on spending the night watching over her son. While she watches the news about our neighborhood crisis, she recalls one and asks Satoru if he remembered the abduction case in their neighborhood when he was in 5th grade, knowing her son's memories were blurry and hazy. Despite how little he was, Satoru remembered the children who went missing years ago and were found dead after being murdered by Yuki, a man who pretended to be friends with the children so he could get close to them. The next day, after shopping with his mom, he gets Revival's sensational trigger, but is unable to point out what piece was out of place. He asks his mother to be on the lookout, and eventually, they find nothing and are accompanied home by Irene. After dinner that evening, Satoru takes Irene home with his bicycle, and when he returns, his mother tells him he could have a chance with Irene, but Satoru quickly debunks his mother's assumptions. When he goes to a bookstore the next day, he sees a magazine of serial murders and flips to the case of one of the children, Hinazuki. She was a mute girl who was always alone, and the night before she was abducted and killed, Satoru saw her standing alone in the park and regrets not asking her to walk with him. Maybe then she would have survived. Unknown to Satoru, his mother sighted a strange man the other day in front of the supermarket and suspects it was an attempted abduction. When she digs deep into the case, she finds out the culprit from the abduction case 18 years ago hasn't been released. Sachiko, unsure of her assumptions, plans to warn Satoru, but unfortunately, she is stabbed with a knife. Before she bleeds to death, she identifies the killer, who is not Yuki, and regrets not believing young Satoru's words when he told her Yuki was innocent. Satoru wraps up work that evening and goes home. He passes a strange man in black by his corridor, but doesn't suspect anything. When he enters his home, he is horrified when he sees his mom unconscious on the floor. A neighbor who arrives and misunderstands the scene calls the police to arrest Satoru. In an attempt to flee the scene, one of his revivals occurs, and time is rewinded 18 years back when he was in 5th grade. Satoru is shocked at the new reality he finds himself in. Revival usually goes back 1 to 5 minutes, but never had this huge time jump happen. Satoru is unable to keep his composure in class when he quits and rushes home. While he waits for his mom, he falls asleep on the floor till she arrives from work, and he is glad that he has the opportunity to have dinner with her again. The next day at school, he wonders why Revival brought him to this time frame, and when he sees Hinazuki alive again, he figures it's to stop his mother's murder years into the future. During class, Satoru notices a bruise on Hinazuki's leg and wonders what the silent girl could be going through. His friends at school, Osamu, Kenya, and others mistake Satoru's stares at Hinazuki as feelings for her and set him up to talk with her after school, which doesn't go as planned because of Hinazuki's snobbish attitude. Kenya, who has been suspicious of Satoru's absent-mindedness and forgetfulness of details, tells Satoru that he can confide in him and gives him hints about Hinazuki from a class composition poem. After he reads it, he now understands that her poem was a cry for help and escape, an SOS. There and then, he makes a vow to correct and change what he couldn't do years ago. He finally approaches Hinazuki at the last place he saw her alive, and where her body was found. He gives her the first invitation to his first ever birthday party, and they both have a warm conversation. It's ice hockey day, and Satoru is grouped to race against Hamada, another student who dreams to win the International Ice Hockey Championship. The girls tease Hinazuki to wish Satoru good luck in his race, which she does, though they knew Hamada would most likely be the winner. The race begins and Satoru goes fast, but on the verge of winning, he slows down and allows Hamada to win the race, knowing how hard Hamada trains for it. After the race, Hamada gives Satoru a hate speech, calling him a punk, and walks away. Satoru figures Hinazuki will lose her life before her 11th birthday, but in an attempt to ask for her birth date after class, she calls him a liar and a fake for letting Hamada win. When he results to checking his teacher's register for Hinazuki's birthday, he is caught by Mr. Yashiro, who's described to have keen intuition. Eventually, his teacher allows him to look through the register, and he finds out that Hinazuki shares the same birthday with him. He meets up with Yuki on his way home, and recalls the nice moments they had together, also recalling that Yuki doesn't deserve to end up in prison as the culprit of the abduction. Later, he visits Hinazuki's home and finds it in a messy state, and is left horrified after finding Hinazuki bruised, beaten, and hidden in a dirty closet by her mother. Hinazuki is absent from school for a few days, and when next she shows up, Satoru sees another scar behind her neck. Mr. Yashiro reveals to Satoru that he suspects Hinazuki is a victim of abuse, but the childcare agencies haven't found any tangible evidence to support their claim because Hinazuki's mother always makes sure she clears her tracks. During the week, Hinazuki is accused of taking everyone's lunch money, and Satoru is the only one who defends her. Hinazuki thanks him for defending her, and later that evening, takes her to see the Christmas tree at the top of the hill. It is precisely a week to Hinazuki's incident, and Satoru is hell-bent on keeping her safe. Satoru notices that Hinazuki's mom hurts her on Saturdays, hence, he plans to avoid that by asking her to hang out with him and his friends. After seeking permission from his mom, he asks his friends, but they all decline, wanting to give him and Hinazuki some privacy. Satoru and Hinazuki go to her house and seek her mother's permission as well. Hinazuki's mom, displeased at Satoru's audacity, attempts to hit her daughter, but Satoru's mom shows up in time and handles the issue. While Satoru and Hinazuki hang out, he gets flashbacks of Hinazuki in the museum and wonders if he was making a difference to erase the past he knows, or whether he was repeating the past. From then on, Satoru and Hinazuki's relationship grew exceedingly. They walked home together every evening, and they walked to school together in the morning. On the day Hinazuki is expected to disappear, Satoru made sure he spent the entire day with her by his side and returned her home safely. He even goes as far as crossing over to the next day with a clock and next to Hinazuki's house to make sure she is safe. The next day, which was their birthday, he arrives very early in the morning to walk her to school, and later go shopping for their birthday. When they arrive home, they are greeted with a surprise party from Satoru's mother and friends, 2 cakes, and a lot of gifts. After Satoru walks her home, making sure she's safe, he returns home and finally has a good night's rest, with the assurance Hinazuki was safe. Satoru wakes up later than usual the next morning, as a result of the stress from the previous day. When he arrives in class, he is informed of Hinazuki's absence and fears that he may have failed this mission. He searches the place where Hinazuki may have gone to, and is disheartened that he is unable to find her. His mother consoles him and advises him to begin school again, because Hinazuki's disappearance wasn't his fault. Meanwhile, the information carried by the school was that Hinazuki traveled to a faraway town to visit her grandmother. Soon after, when another child is kidnapped, that's when the news about Hinazuki's case comes to light, as well as the serial abductions. Just then, Satoru awakens in his current 29-year-old self and is perplexed that nothing had changed. His mother was still dead, and there were cops all around his house. While he plans his next course of action, he is taken into the care of his manager, but he had to escape after finding the manager with the cops. When he escapes, he runs into Arete, who offers him shelter. Through Arete, he discovers that Hinazuki's date of death and age was changed after he stalled it, and he figures he could go back and save his mom. Arete goes on with her day-to-day activities to avoid suspicion, and she bumps into the manager and an unknown man having a conversation. The manager tells Arete to cater for Satoru if she runs into him, but Arete is disgusted when she finds him in contact with the police. Satoru results in hiding underneath a bridge after his hideout was discovered. He asks Arete why she's helping him, and she answers that it's because she trusts him. When Arete gets home that night, she sees Satoru's mother's phone and realizes it is a scheme from the serial abductor, and later finds her house on a blazing fire. Satoru dives into the fire to save Arete and finds the manager, who tells him to flee and keep Arete out of his dirty business. Before he goes, Arete slips his mother's phone into his pocket. It is revealed that the murderer took hostage of his mom's belongings that night, and the only way the phone could have gotten into Arete's house was because the murderer tailed Arete. Later that day, he meets up with Sawada, the detective who was formerly in charge of Hinazuki's case. He reveals to Satoru that his mother figured out the identity of the murderer, but was killed before she told him the name. He gives insights into Hinazuki's case, how her body was found in the shed by the murderer one night after her mother and her mother's boyfriend hit her. He also reveals that the murderer always frames innocent people, just like how Yuki was pinned responsible for the childhood abductions, and now Satoru for his mother's death. Arete awakens and is disheartened to see Satoru's name listed as a wanted fugitive. She calls his mother's line and asks him to meet up with her under the bridge. Despite the risk involved and how it could be a police trap, he agrees to it. Arete gives him information about the man who always visits the manager, who could also be the possible murderer. Satoru apologizes for dragging Arete into his mess and swings a compliment her way, which gets her flustered. Unfortunately, their moment is ruined when the police arrive and handcuff Satoru. Before Satoru is taken away, he catches a cold glimpse of the man from his apartment on the night of his mother's murder. Just then, time froze while Satoru looked at the man with intense hatred and disgust. That brings us to the end of Erased Part 1. I hope you enjoyed this recap as much as I did. Please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and kindly comment below with your thoughts on this anime. If you would like a part 2 of Erased, also comment below. Bye and thanks for watching. See you next time.